2016 was an up and down year for WWE, but then again, what year isn't? Seriously, is there any company in the world that experiences such highs and lows within the space of 365 days? Would it be possible for them to go one whole year without some scandal, major firing, or crazy booking decision? I hope not, because then we'd have nothing but half-decent wrestling and I would likely be out of a job. What the hell would I talk about if Vince decided to start taking all of his meds? In 2016, everyone was talking about the retirement of Daniel Bryan, the return of Goldberg, and the WWE debut of AJ Styles. They were also mulling over the draft split, a certain major star suspension, and another big-time player deciding that maybe he wanted to go back to real fighting, at least for a little while. Yes, it was another newsworthy year at Titan Sports, and many talking points took place on pay-per-view, of which there were 15 in total. That's not including Roadblock in March, which was not a pay-per-view but a pretty needless network exclusive a few weeks before WrestleMania. Guess how many titles changed hands? Go on! That's right, none of them. Some were huge disappointments, others were pleasant surprises, and some were just plain forgettable. Overall though, it was a good year in the ring, and there were several shows that had some truly outstanding matches on them. But which ones are they, and which ones are the duds? To find out, I went back and did some investigating that would make Commissioner Foley proud. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and this is every WWE pay-per-view of 2016 ranked from worst to best. Join us. Number 15, Fastlane. Fastlane 2016 is not a terrible pay-per-view. In fact, there were no outright atrocities during the whole of 2016, so well done to you, Vince McMahon. Fastlane 2016 is just an unnecessary one, with more fluff than a bunny rabbit eating candy floss and sitting on a cloud. Curtis Axel versus R-Truth, the Wyatt family taking on Kane, Big Show, and Ryback, a 20-minute talk show segment with Edge and Christian and The New Day, all stuff that could have stayed on the television shows because really, they did nothing to help get the viewer excited about or interested in the upcoming WrestleMania. You know, the biggest show of the year. Of the good stuff, Becky Lynch and Sasha Banks versus Team Bad was simple but hard-hitting and well worked. Kevin Owens and Dolph Ziggler had a very good and athletic match over the IC title, and AJ Styles had his first solo WWE pay-per-view outing against Chris Jericho. A harbinger of things to come in his WWE career, this was a really great effort by the Phenomenal One, who had the perfect opponent in Y2J, and the match built and built to a satisfying conclusion. However, a satisfying conclusion was lacking in the main event, the perennially unpopular Roman Reigns going over on Dean Ambrose and Brock Lesnar in a match to determine the challenger to WWE Champion Triple H. Don't worry, we'll get there later. At this point in time, and at several other points in time also, the fans were not accepting Roman Reigns as the guy. The match itself, mind you, was a belter, and everyone worked hard to produce a unique and dramatic contest. Number 14, Roadblock, End of the Line. Coming in at number 14 is Roadblock, End of the Line, which sadly is not that massive WCW jobber from the mid-90s. No, it's a new WWE pay-per-view concept, if you can call it that, the final major show of 2016. Just to confuse us and to perhaps highlight the dearth of creativity within the circle of decision makers, WWE presented another WWE Network special show called Roadblock earlier in the year, taking place just a few weeks before WrestleMania. That show had a great Triple H versus Dean Ambrose WWE title match, which was better than anything on offer here. Again, it wasn't a bad show by any means, it was just a standard show with a couple of decent matches and a lot of filler. Roadblock End of the Line opened with a stirring New Day versus Sheamus and Cesaro Raw Tag Team title match, which was packed with false finishes and built to a grand climax, with the Bar Brothers winning the straps. The card also featured an Iron Woman match with Sasha Banks and Charlotte fighting over the Raw Women's Championship. The match started with a steady pace and had no falls going into the final 10 minutes, which is where the action really picked up. Finishing 2-2, sudden death overtime was required. Charlotte then prevailed over a bloody and beaten Banks, who gave a hell of a performance in this losing effort. In the main event, Kevin Owens retained the Universal title over Roman Reigns when Chris Jericho, who had just lost to Seth Rollins in a fair match earlier in the night, got Roman Reigns disqualified. It was a good match, but perhaps too long considering the finish. Elsewhere, Sami Zayn barely survived a 10-minute challenge match with Braun Strowman, and Neville returned and turned heel, kicking off his excellent run in the 205 Live division. Number 13, WrestleMania 32. Disappointing would be the best way to sum up WrestleMania 32, as the biggest show of the year finds itself in the unlucky number 13 position on our list. Unlucky could certainly describe Neville, who was injured just weeks out from the event and lost his place in the Intercontinental title ladder match that opened the show. His replacement, Zack Ryder, was more fortunate, taking the spot and winning the match in a surprising moment. Not so surprising was him losing it to The Miz 24 hours later on Raw. In match number 2, Y2J got his win back over AJ Styles in a match that, while technically good, failed to reach that next gear you expect in this setting. One thing nobody expected was a surprise appearance by Mick Foley, a remarkably buff Shawn Michaels, and Stone Cold Steve Austin, who marched down to the ring after the New Day vs. League of Nations 6-man match and pasted everyone involved, just in case you were confused as to who the real stars were. The show trudged along with Brock Lesnar and Dean Ambrose having an infamously underwhelming no-holds-barred street fight. According to the Lunatic Fringe, Lesnar showed up to the AT&T Stadium reluctant to do anything exceptional, and as a result, the match suffered. Things picked up in the next bout, a triple threat match to determine the first holder of the rebooted women's title. No longer quote-unquote divas, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair had the best match of the night. Charlotte picked up the win by submission after lots of inventive spots and near falls. The Undertaker, that loser who lost that match to Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 30, was back on familiar turf as he stepped inside Hell in a Cell. Not so familiar was his opponent, Shane McMahon, who was wrestling his first match in 7 years since making his shock return to the company. Your enjoyment of this will depend on how much of Super Shane, the mid-40s baseball jersey wearing corporate exec, you can take, as he went almost 30 minutes with the Phenom. Of course, everyone remembers the ridiculous giant elbow off the top of the cell, but the match itself wasn't all bad, if not unmemorable, next to the big spot that everyone was waiting for. Baron Corbin won the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, featuring all of the geeks that worked hard all year round and probably deserved the payday, as well as surprises like DDP, Tatanka, and, Shaq. Then The Rock came out with some cheerleaders, set his name on fire, beat Eric Rowan in 6 seconds, and then teamed with John Cena to get rid of the rest of the Wyatt family because the show was only running at about 6 hours at that point and totally needed it. And finally, and I do mean finally, Roman Reigns beat Triple H for the WWE title after a long match in front of an understandably tired crowd who pretty much only woke up when Reigns shockingly speared Stephanie McMahon. Not a great WrestleMania by any means, but there are some highlights to be found in the undercard. Credit to you if you make it through the whole show. Number 12, SummerSlam. Number 12, and it's another major and hotly anticipated show that underdelivered on the night. Don't get me wrong, there were some good matches here, including one of the best of the entire year, but the show peaked in the middle and never really regained that momentum, ending on a bit of a downer. Had the credits rolled after the outstanding AJ Styles John Cena match, this one might have ranked higher. An instant classic, Cena vs Styles was everything you would want in a match, telling an incredible story and turning AJ into a megastar. The crowd was molten for everything here, which really added to the occasion. And there were other good matches on the show, including Finn Balor and Seth Rollins clashing over the brand new Universal title. Unfortunately, Balor got injured early on, but still gutted it out and won the match. Unfortunately, he'd have to relinquish the title soon after. Sasha Banks and Charlotte had another strong match, as you would expect they would. Enzo and Cass went up against Jericho in a hot and well-worked opener, and in the main event, Brock Lesnar beat Randy Orton by stoppage after busting him open. The match was unique, but certainly not as good as the talent of both men suggests it should have been. In fact, people more vividly remember the fact that Chris Jericho tried to fight Lesnar after the match because he assumed that the next big thing had shot on the Viper. The rest of the show was just okay. If you don't see Dean Ambrose vs Dolph Ziggler, New Day vs The Good Brothers, The Miz vs Apollo Crews, or Rusev and Reigns brawl, you shouldn't lose any sleep over it. Number 11, Money in the Bank. Money in the Bank 2016 was an interesting night for The Shield. First, Dean Ambrose won the men's Money in the Bank ladder match, a barnstorming affair also featuring Chris Jericho, Cesaro, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and Alberto Del Rio. Then, in the main event, Seth Rollins, who had returned from a serious knee injury a month before, downed Roman Reigns to claim the WWE title. After that, Ambrose cashed in his Money in the Bank contract and quickly beat Rollins to win his first WWE title to a huge reaction. A newsworthy night, things got even more interesting 2 days after the show when it was announced that Roman had been suspended for 30 days due to his first violation of the wellness policy, later revealed to be for the use of Adderall. Those were the major stories coming out of Money in the Bank, but there was also some noteworthy stuff happening elsewhere, like AJ Styles and John Cena clashing in their first ever singles outing, a notch below their SummerSlam screamer but still pretty bloody good. The card to that point, a 4-way tag team title match, Baron Corbin versus Dolph Ziggler, Charlotte and Dana Brooke versus Becky Lynch and Natalya, and Sheamus versus Apollo Crews, was as inspiring as a 20-minute Lance Storm promo. Overall, it's a good and memorable show, but far from one of the best of the year. Number 10, No Mercy. WWE revived the No Mercy name for the first time since 2008 for a SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view, the second in the new brand split era, and it kicked off with the advertised main event. This was because the presidential election debate between Hillary Clinton and WWE Hall of Famer Donald Trump would be airing later on, and WWE didn't fancy their chances. So Cena, Ambrose, and Styles jerked the curtain in style, piecing together a riveting 20-minute match full of ups and downs and clever spots that we've never seen before. Truthfully, nothing on the show could hope to follow it, but The Miz and Dolph Ziggler's Intercontinental title versus career match came close. Another 20-minute rollercoaster stuffed with false finishes, high drama, and even a Spirit Squad run-in, this was a great piece of business by two men who are well used to each other by now. In the main event, Randy Orton fell to Bray Wyatt thanks to a distraction from the returning Luke Harper. It wasn't the best match you'll ever see, but at least it didn't have worms projected on the ring canvas. And everything else was just about ordinary and nothing you wouldn't find on your average episode of Smackers. Still, seek out the WWE and IC title matches and stick around for the main event provided it doesn't clash with some important political broadcast. Number 9, Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell 2016 was a history-making night as, for the first time ever, two women headlined a WWE pay-per-view. Not only that, but the Raw Women's title match between Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair was also the first women's Hell in a Cell match of all time. For this significant occasion, both wrestlers were given the big entrance treatment, the Nature Girl being carried out on a throne and the Boss rolling into the arena in a baller SUV similar to the one that I drive around the mean streets of the Isle of Wight. The match started off fast and furious, spilling outside of the cell and almost ending when Sasha Banks was powerbombed through the announce table in vicious fashion. She returned and the two had a punishing match, also featuring chairs and a table. In the end, Charlotte prevailed and won her third women's title. There were another two Hell in a Cell matches on the undercard, including the opener between Roman Reigns and Rusev, a bruising battle between the Bulgarian Brute and the Big Dog over the US title. The Universal title was also on the line as Kevin Owens, with Chris Jericho, as always, took on Seth Rollins in a match that built steadily until the expected Y2J interference, at which point it essentially became a handicap match. Owens would go on to eke out a win, but only thanks to the help from his then best friend. And elsewhere, the Cruiserweight title changed hands, Brian Kendrick besting TJ Perkins in a fine match. The Bar failed to end the New Day's long Raw Tag Team title reign thanks to a DQ. Not an all-timer, but there's enough great stuff between the three Hell in a Cell matches, all of which were entertaining and different from one another, for this to be worth your time. Number 8, Clash of Champions. Clash of Champions now, the first Raw exclusive pay-per-view since the brand split, and an event with a familiar flavour to it. Taking place before Hell in a Cell, Clash of Champions also featured Seth Rollins taking on Kevin Owens, Rusev battling Roman Reigns, Charlotte and Sasha going at it, although this time with Bayley also in the mix, and TJ Perkins and Brian Kendrick grappling it up. Despite the sense of deja vu, this is also another really fun show and just edges Hell in a Cell because of its overall quality. All of the aforementioned matches were very good, but match of the night honours went to Cesaro and Sheamus, who weren't teaming but rather going head-to-head in their best of 7 series. Tied 3 for 3 going in, this brilliant back-and-forth war sadly couldn't provide a winner as the match ended in a no contest. Non-finish aside, this was another example of the amazing chemistry these two have together, whether teaming up or knocking 7 bells out of one another. Elsewhere, Chris Jericho and Sami Zayn had a high-energy scrap, and New Day versus Gallows and Anderson for the Raw Tag titles was non-stop action, and a fitting way to start a show that had no major dips, besides Cesaro dipping his own head and neck on that dive. Woof. Number 7, TLC. Number 7 is TLC, a fine way for the superstars of SmackDown to sign off their year on pay-per-view. The tables, ladders and chairs WWE title topliner between AJ Styles and Dean Ambrose was a stunning tour de force from two of the company's most dependable and hardworking stars. Not just a stunt show, this had good wrestling and wild brawling too. There were some career-shortening big moves, of course, including a massive elbow drop from the top of a ladder through the announce table from Ambrose. That jaw-dropping visual was topped in style by, Styles, who unleashed a breathtaking springboard 450 splash from the top to the outside and through a table. Simply phenomenal. The James Ellsworth at the end stuff is a little jarring viewed years later, but the drama is incredible and the finish takes nothing away from one of the best matches of the year. On any other night, match of the night may have gone to The Miz and Dolph Ziggler, who had a gripping ladder match for the Intercontinental title. Both of these guys get their share of stick because they've been around forever and done everything, but it's worth remembering that both are very, very good professional wrestlers, and when given the time and the tools, they can produce something special. In other news, Alexa Bliss beat Becky Lynch in a tables match to capture the SmackDown Women's title, Baron Corbin rolled over Kalisto in a resourceful and spirited chairs match, Nikki Bella beat Carmella, hey Dr. Seuss, in a no DQ match, and spooky Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt took the SmackDown Tag Team titles from Heath Slater and Rhino, who were the first holders of the new straps. Heath Slater and Rhino, first WWE SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Now there's a pub quiz answer if I've ever heard one. Number 6. Survivor Series. Survivor Series 2016 was built around bringing a video game dream match to life. If given the opportunity to do the same, I'd have run with Trevor Murdoch versus Mojo Rawley, but fair enough, they went with the obvious choice of Brock Lesnar versus Goldberg. Goldberg flattening Lesnar in 90 seconds after 2 spears and a jackhammer was not the obvious choice of outcome, but it was a welcome one and certainly created a moment that no one will forget. The brevity of the main event was countered by the epic 50-minute runtime of the Raw vs SmackDown 10-man elimination tag match. Not too much to complain about here, this had many storylines running through it, all of the eliminations made sense within the context of the match, and everyone busted their ass to put on a hell of a show. The men's 10-team 20-man traditional Survivor Series elimination match was also given plenty of time to develop and showcased each team nicely. The finishing stretch between the Bar and the Usos was golden and acted as a nice precursor to their standard tag match the following year. The Cruiserweight, IC, and Women's Survivor Series matches were all just okay, but the show would have been fine without them. Number 5. Payback. The first pay-per-view after WrestleMania 32, Payback 2016 was touted by WWE as being the start of a new era in the company. Of course, a new era in WWE means the McMahons being heavily involved with on-air roles, a finish calling back to the 1997 Montreal Screwjob, and Roman Reigns overcoming the odds in the main event. Oh well. Despite the false dawn, Payback was at least a very good wrestling show, boasting 4 outstanding matches, the best of the bunch being Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn's hate-filled slugfest that ably demonstrated their chemistry and passion for the craft. Zayn and Owens would again show up at the finish of Cesaro and The Miz's Seesaw Intercontinental title match, which had the Swiss Superman looking like a star before the finish. The efforts of all 4 men on the night gave hope to the IC title division in the supposed new era. Years before fighting in AEW, Dean Ambrose and Chris Jericho had a stellar match that looked like it could have gone either way before Ambrose just edged it. And Roman Reigns and AJ Styles had a solidly worked WWE title match with a little Attitude Era screwiness in the form of match restarts and McMahon meddling thrown in. This was also further proof, as if it were ever needed, that Reigns was a long way from being accepted as the top babyface, no matter how hard he worked in the ring. That Chicago crowd was not having any of it. Elsewhere, Charlotte and Natalia's women's title match was marred by the lame finish, and the number 1 contender tag team tournament finals were ruined by Enzo almost decapitating himself. Or improved, depending on how much you like Enzo. Number 4. Extreme Rules. WWE's follow-up to Payback was a night of extremes. There was some extremely good action, an extremely welcome return, and, as per, some extremely poor booking. But most of what was here was enjoyable, and Extreme Rules served as a commendable follow-up to Payback. As with the previous month's show, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Cesaro, and The Miz all showed up determined to steal the show, putting together a ridiculously entertaining 4-way over the IC title that flowed like 2-for-1 Jaeger bombs at the Cultaholic Christmas party. Truthfully, I felt just as tipsy at the end of this barn burner. Despite also putting on a clinic at Payback, Dean Ambrose and Chris Jericho couldn't quite replicate the magic here. Their asylum match, though novel, only really got going towards the end of a long 25 minutes when Jericho was pinned, and then defeated. Get it? Because he took a bump onto the pins. Honestly, I don't know why I bother sometimes. And in the main event, Roman Reigns and AJ Styles had a cracking no DQ match for the WWE title, with AJ doing everything in his power to make Roman look like the tippy-top guy the company yearned for him to be. It didn't completely work out that way, but at least the match was fantastic, and the surprise return of Seth Rollins after it set up an intriguing program now that the Styles feud was wrapped up. Elsewhere, Rusev won the US title by beating Kalisto, Gallows and Anderson flattened the Usos in a tornado tag match, The New Day predictably brushed aside the Vaudevillains, and Charlotte beat Natalya in a submission match. The IC and WWE title matches alone make this one worth your $9.99. Number 3, Backlash. WWE began their post-draft split era with a very enjoyable SmackDown branded show, the first single branded pay-per-view since No Way Out 2007. The night, like so many in 2016, belonged to AJ Styles. In the show's main event, the face that runs the place got the better of Dean Ambrose after a low blow and Styles clash, capping off a thrilling match and giving AJ his first WWE title. In the opener, Becky Lynch outlasted Naomi, Alexa Bliss, Carmella, Natalya and Nikki Bella in a 6-woman elimination match to be crowned the first SmackDown Women's Champion. The match was super energetic and the last kicker was a very popular winner. In the final of the WWE SmackDown Tag Team title tournament, Heath Slater and Rhino upset the Usos to bag the gold. Well, to bag the silver and blue anyway. There wasn't much to the match, but it was a nice moment for two hardworking and dependable pros. The Miz and Dolph Ziggler had an engaging match over the Intercontinental title, but now how many times have you heard me say that so far in this countdown, honestly? Finally, Kane, substituting for an injured Randy Orton, went over Bray Wyatt in a no DQ match, with a little help, of course, from Randy Randall. Number 2, Royal Rumble. Some things in life are inevitable. Death, taxes, Triple H winning the WWE title. You just have to accept them and move on, or you'll drive yourself crazy thinking about them. Yes, Triple H winning the WWE title in the 2016 Royal Rumble match seemed like a massive FU to the fan base. After all, the game was now an executive with the company and hadn't been a full-time in-ring performer in around 7 years. Besides, there were plenty of viable options to pick from on the full-time main roster, like Dean Ambrose, current champion Roman Reigns, Bray Wyatt, Sheamus, or any other number of guys. Did Hunter really need to pad out his resume at this stage of his career? Anyway, ignoring those gripes for a second, there's no doubting that the 2016 Royal Rumble match was a thriller. Roman's title being on the line and him having to defend it as entrant number 1 added a new element, and there were lots of great moments contained within. Who could forget R-Truth grabbing a ladder and climbing up it to retrieve something that wasn't there? Or the Wyatts ganging up to break up Brock's suplex party? Or AJ freaking Styles making his WWE debut as entrant number 3? Even if we couldn't see it properly at the time, it was still good. It was still good. It was a fantastic Royal Rumble, but it wasn't the only good thing on the card. Opening the show was a brutal and violent IC title last man standing match between Ambrose and Owens. I'm sure both guys felt that one the next day. The New Day versus the Usos, Kalisto versus Del Rio, and Charlotte versus Becky for the Tag Team, United States, and Divas titles. Yes, remember it was actually called that before Sane Heads prevailed. All had merit and helped bolster a good show bookended by two fabulous outings. Number 1, Battleground. There were no gimmick matches and no titles changed hands at Battleground. No, the best WWE pay-per-view of 2016 is so because it was a great wrestling show with a minimum of blather, consistently good action, and a pacing that meant it flew by. Once more, Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens had a staggeringly good match right out of Reseda, Southern California. Stuffed with big moves and many false finishes, this hockey fight of a match ended in a cathartic victory for Zayn and capped off a long and satisfying storyline. The Shield exploded in the triple threat WWE title main event, a match that practically sold itself. It was so inherently intriguing, it lived up to expectations between the ropes. Expectations were exceeded in the 6-man between the Club and Cena and Enzo and Cass, a surprising gem that nicely set up the Cena-style singles matches to follow. More good 6-man action came from the New Day and the Wyatt family, while the women's division was showcased in a strong tag team opener and a rousing Becky versus Natalya match. The only real down notes, and there's always at least something to get cranky about, were a meandering highlight reel segment with Jericho and a returning Randy Orton. I'll give you absolutely nothing if you can guess the punchline to that one. And a couple of obvious fill-abouts in the shape of Zack Ryder versus Rusev for the US title, and The Miz versus Darren Young, with Chris crazy old Bob Backlund for the IC. Both of those belts had and would see better days. Still, take away the minor filler and you have mostly excellent stuff here. 2016 maybe wasn't the strongest for WWE on pay-per-view, but Battleground would fit in nicely most years.